Hi everyone, this is Andrew Primo, Ukrainian American reporting from Ukraine. In this podcast, week 42 of war in Ukraine, and this is the second week of December 2022. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about Russia strikes energy infrastructure of Ukraine again, but in response, Ukraine strikes Russian territory. Western allies keep supplying weapons and Bakhmut battle is continuing. On Wednesday, December 14th, Russia attacked Ukrainian infrastructure with Shahed drones. At least the systems that have been delivered so far and those that have been operated by the air defense forces of Ukraine are working better and better. In the morning on December 14th, the Russians launched 13 Shahed drones in two waves in the directions of the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. All three drones were shot down by Ukrainians. However, some damage, some damage from their debris, damage from their debris was caused to administrative buildings in Shevchenkiv's district, which is the center of the capital. Up to 15 million Ukrainians were left without electricity and heating, and often without water 24 hours a day, and without electricity for even longer. But at least some of the West leaders have finally understood that supplying Ukraine with defense weapons cannot be considered as a provocation. During the last massive attacks on Friday that week, Russia used every type of weapon. However, this time they didn't use the drones. On December 16th, the enemy didn't launch any Shahed 136 model drones into Ukrainian territory, but it employed every other type of weapon, said Yuri Hnat, a spokesman for Ukraine Armed Forces. He explained that the enemy used land based, air based, and the sea based missiles. Also, he noted that before the attack, the enemy studied and planned its moves very carefully, using air, space, and ground intelligence, including social networks. The weather conditions didn't affect their ability to launch missiles, but did impact their ability to observe the consequences of their strikes. On December 16th, the Russian Federation fired 76 rockets at Ukraine's critical infrastructure, which included 72 X 101 missiles, Caliber, and X 22 ground launched cruise missiles, and four guided X 59 and X 31P air missiles. Ukraine's armed forces destroyed 60 incoming rockets. However, a few rockets still hit energy infrastructure of Kiev region. Western intelligence repeatedly say that Russia is firing missiles that Ukraine produced back in 1990s. According to analysis, the Russian invaders are striking Ukraine with rockets transferred from Ukraine to the Russian Federation in early 90s as part as of international agreement that Russia violated by invading Ukraine in 2014 and then in 2022. These ballistic missiles are being launched from aircraft's Tu-160 and Tu-95 strategic bombers, which Ukraine transferred to Russia within the framework of the Budapest Memorandum. According to the memorandum, Russia, the United States, and Great Britain have pledged to respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and existing borders. With this agreement, Russia recognized that Crimea and the Donetsk and Luhansk regions are part of Ukraine. In this agreement, Russia also undertook to refrain from the threat of force or its use against Ukraine's territorial integrity and political independence. Among other provisions, Russia has violated the Russian Federation is that the Russian Federation removed the nuclear warheads from decommissioned Kh-55 subsonic cruise missiles, which are currently being used in the mass missile strikes on Ukraine. The more Russia attacks energy infrastructure, the more Ukraine keeps receiving weapons from Western allies to fight the enemy. Last week, Slovakia announced its readiness to provide Ukraine with MiG 29 fighters. This issue was discussed in detail with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Also, the country is currently talking with NATO partners about how to go about this. I think a Ukrainian delegation will come to Slovakia in the coming weeks and, together with America and France, will work to make it happen. So, at the same time, Britain allows the transfer of Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine. The UK has not ruled out the possibility of transferring Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine, said the British Minister of Defense Ben Wallace. I'm not going to speculate about the types of weapons being supplied. Russia would like to know what weapons we can transfer to Ukraine to support it. We will discuss that only with Ukrainians based on their needs and technical capabilities. So, on top of that, the US will, will supply Ukraine with equipment to create smart bombs. The Biden administration plans to provide Ukraine with modern electronic equipment to turn unguided aerial munitions into smart bombs, wrote Washington Times. The equipment necessary for production of joint direct attack munitions includes global positioning devices to increase accuracy and can be attached to various weapons, including ground based systems. The publication noted that it is unclear whether President Biden or any other of his top national security advisors have approved the proposed equipment to be transferred to Ukraine. However, at the same time, Ukraine doesn't waste its time. The state the state company Ukroboronprom is developing a kamikaze drones with the option to return. State concern Ukroboronprom is developing the new drones with the possibility to return to its launch site, said Oleg Baldurev, project head for the company. According to him, the drone has already been developed and is currently being tested. We named him Patient Zero, he said. Speaking of an attack drone, we're talking about the kamikaze variant, but it will be able to complete the mission and return to the military base, he added. The hardware portion of the drone is made of foreign made parts, but the software was made in Ukraine. The drone's range will be 1,000 kilometers and the warhead's weight is 75 kilos. Just for comparison, the effective maximum flight range of the Iranian Russian drone Shahid is about 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers with the ability to deliver a warhead within only 40 kilos. In the last couple of weeks, Ukraine armed forces already used such drones and attacked the Russian Air Force bases deep inside Russian territory. Also, Ukraine has used already developed drones Tu-141 or called Strij drone. A video recording of the launch of the Ukrainian Strij drone appears to confirm that this weapon was used to strike the Russian Engels 2 and Diaghilev bomber bases deep inside of Russian territory. Ukraine had to repair about 68 such drones back in 2014. The first video of deployment of the Switchblade 300 mini LPGM has appeared as well. There was a lot of talks about their supply back in March, April, but so far we had not seen any of them in action. The Biden administration seems to have decided to supply Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. The Pentagon has already agreed, but the plan still has to be approved by the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and then signed by Joe Biden. At this time, the exact number and version of the Patriot Advanced Capability System being delivered, which currently is unknown. However, in response to the US statements, France and Italy are reportedly going to supply Ukraine with Mamba air defense systems. Paris should have already confirmed this, but negotiations with Rome are still ongoing. Now, let's talk about the fierce battle for Bakhmut in the Donetsk region that has been going on for 7-8 months. Several people who are fighting in Bakhmut region emphasize that there is no sign of withdrawal of the armed forces from the area. On the contrary, although some Russian attacks, for example on the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut in the last 2 days, have caused problems, and although several units of armed forces have suffered heavy casualties. However, the garrison has strengthened and is holding steady. To the north of Bakhmut remains under the control of Ukraine. They are maintained by a number of smaller units drawn from various brigades but under the command of the headquarters of the 57th Mechanized Brigade. First of all of Bakhmut remains in the hands of Ukrainians, with the exception of the eastern suburbs and the southern suburbs. Further south, the front line has stabilized, which is on the east of Klishivka, but the Russian control Andreevka. Now, both in Ukraine and abroad, there are many guesses about the purpose of Putin pushing Bakhmut so far. What is the purpose of that battle? In one of the video interviews, one of the leading Ukrainian artillery commanders said that Russia's overall goal is to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk region, which includes Bakhmut. To do this, the Russians are trying to bypass the city with strikes from the northeast and south of it. The goal of these attacks is to block Ukrainian supply channels for Bakhmut. Ukrainian armed forces defend Bakhmut with their lives. However, our artillery still lacks of ammunition, but resupply from the West countries keeps it operational. What the artillery of armed forces of Ukraine receiving during October-November was enough to destroy the mass of Russian heavy equipment, including tanks, BMPs, armored personnel carriers, artillery, and other ammunition in the Bakhmut area, primarily with the help of 155 millimeter Excalibur guided projectiles. This forced the Russians to withdraw the remaining heavy equipment and operate only with infantry, as well as to change their tactics. The mass of operations carried out by Russian armed forces in this area over the past 2 weeks was a human wave. Frontal attacks of about 26,000 prisoners recruited by the Russian special Wagner group. At first, this caught the Ukrainians by surprise. No one could believe that the Russians would act in this way or would be willing to suffer or sacrifice such huge losses. Moreover, Ukraine had to learn how to deal with such attacks. This is what causes the loss of several positions and heavy losses of several Ukrainian units. On top of all that, the weather conditions have been influencing the nature of the war for several weeks. When the temperature drops below zero, soldiers sweat while moving, and as soon as they stop, they immediately freeze. On the other hand, In advanced positions, the problem is to maintain camouflage and stay warm and cook food somehow. Ukrainians trying to remain unnoticed in the forest belt need to watch the advance of the enemies when they try to attack one by one. It is very difficult to stay warm when you have to wait without moving for a long time for the next Russian offensive. In addition, wes- wet shoes always lead to diseases. This problem is so big that the Russian army that poorly equipped stealing shoes and thermal clothing from fallen Ukrainian soldiers. Any uniform, even of the highest quality, deteriorates pretty quickly. Weather conditions, rain, cloudiness, and fog, typical of this time of the year, impair the functioning of enemy movement detection systems. For heavy equipment, tanks, and artillery, every movement seems more difficult. This is not a problem if you need to move several units of equipment, but if it is a battalion, then these are huge difficulties. When the ground freezes, it will make things easier, but not ideal, but not will not create ideal conditions either. First of all, for wheeled machinery that gets stuck easily. All this affects the supply of ammunition from the rear. Deliveries are always late. The logistics system should take better care of deliveries to the front, especially artillery. This is that is logistics need to make additional movements and its trucks need to be lighter. The Russians in this regard are trying to use all these defensive difficulties to advance. They are trying to find and destroy the Ukrainian artillery and those units that were left without ammunition and with a shortage of night vision devices. This happened south of Bakhmut since the end of November. There, the Russians managed to capture about 50 square kilometers of in the past couple of weeks. To some extent, this is not due to the loss of personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine, but rather to the lack of ammunition. Lately, many people started talking about the possibility of the second attempt to capture Kiev from the north, but I believe that's impossible. There is a lot of talks between Russia and Belarus just to concentrate forces and to get ready for such attempt. However, too many losses were inflicted on Russian soldiers. It will take a lot of time for the complex training of young men to replenish the ranks of the special forces and the airborne forces of Russia. It will be incredibly difficult for the Russians to organize such an operation again. And don't forget, and all the borders already full Ukraine armed forces are completely equipped and ready to defeat the enemy. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends and listen to the earlier podcast. Thank you.